In the old 1600s, when kingdoms were shaped by sword and scripture, Europe's forests held more than wolves and shadows. They held secrets, ancient ones, older than parchment and crown. Among these, none was spoken of with greater unease than the Forest of Whispers, a dense stretch of wilderness so thick that sunlight seemed reluctant to enter. Villagers along its borders avoided speaking of it at night. When forced to, they spoke in hushed tones, as though the trees themselves might be listening. Travelers swore they heard their names whispered between branches. Hunters returned without their shadows, some said, while others never returned at all. What lived within was never certain, only that it was patient. In the autumn of 1627, a historian by the name of Lord Alistair Rowan was commissioned by the Crown to document forgotten structures across the land. His work was not of war or politics but of ruins, castles left to crumble, shrines abandoned, and monuments that had slipped from memory. Rowan believed that every ruin told a story, and every story belonged to history. He was a man of reason, guided not by superstition but by evidence. When he reached the edge of the Forest of Whispers, he expected to find another crumbled tower or perhaps a shrine to a forgotten saint. Yet, from the moment he spoke of entering, the villagers recoiled. They refused coin, food, or favor in exchange for guidance. "The forest does not let men leave as men," one farmer whispered before crossing himself. Another spat at Rowan's boots and warned, not all towers were built for kings. But Rowan had heard rumors, whispers of a structure swallowed by moss and time, never mapped, never marked. It intrigued him more than it frightened him. What history had been hidden so carefully that even the bravest men would not speak of it directly? With only a lantern, his journal, and his sword at his hip, Rowan pressed into the forest alone. The deeper he went, the heavier the air became. The sill. Rowan did not sleep that first night. The clearing was too quiet, the forest too still. Each time he closed his eyes, he swore he heard the creak of a stair shifting under invisible weight, or the low murmur of voices carried down the tower's moss-wrapped walls. He sat by his lantern, quill scratching furiously across parchment, recording every impression before courage failed him. By dawn, his historian's discipline had returned. He reminded himself of his purpose, to study, not to fear. Towers had builders, builders had patrons, and patrons left records. Somewhere, hidden in archives or in memory, the truth of this structure must exist. Before entering the tower, Rowan resolved to search for its history. He returned to the nearest village, 3 days' march from the clearing, and demanded access to their parish records. The priest, an elderly man with hands like gnarled roots, reluctantly allowed him into the dusty crypt where scrolls and ledgers were kept. Rowan found references to noble estates, chapels, even old wayhouses built along forgotten roads. But the tower? Nothing. When he pressed the priest, the old man finally spoke, voice shaking. "The tower is not ours to claim. It was never consecrated, never blessed. It belongs to no king, no church, no hand of man." Rowan frowned. "Every stone is laid by hand. Someone built it. For what purpose?" The priest's eyes grew distant. "For purpose we were not meant to serve." It was not until Rowan bribed a village elder with silver that he heard a tale closer to history than myth. The elder spoke of 1602, when a man named Erasmus Vale arrived in the region. He was said to be an alchemist, some whispered a sorcerer, who claimed to study the hidden order of the stars. He purchased land on the forest's edge, paid builders in gold, and raised a tower in secret. No mason who worked there lived long, the elder muttered. They said he demanded strange angles, that the spiral stair must match the heavens. Men went mad. Rowan lingered in the chamber longer than he wished. The air pressed heavy against his lungs, thick with the scent of damp stone and something faintly metallic, blood, or perhaps the memory of it. His historian's instincts urged him to continue recording, but his body trembled with unease. He forced himself to sketch the altar, its symbols, and the curious arrangement of offerings that littered the floor. Coins of strange mint. Bones, too brittle to belong to recent years. Wax from candles long extinguished, though their stubs seemed oddly unconsumed. It was as though Erasmus Vale's ritual had only just ended, though nearly 3 decades had passed since 1602. The whisper he had heard haunted him still. Finish what he began. Was it an echo of memory, an illusion born of exhaustion? Or had the stones themselves spoken? Rowan's mind raced with possibility, but the scholar in him demanded proof. He steadied himself with reason. If Erasmus had built this tower with intent, then intent must be carved deeper within. Lantern in hand, Rowan pressed onward. The spiral staircase beckoned again. Outside the chamber, moss wrapped the steps in a living shroud, curling like fingers over stone. Each step seemed to drink the light from his lantern, shadows stretching unnaturally long. As he ascended, he noticed the spiral's peculiar design more clearly. It was not built merely to reach upward. Each rotation felt deliberate, as though tracing a path written not for men, but for stars. Rowan paused, running his hand across the grooves etched into the outer wall. They aligned with his earlier sketches, cycles of Saturn and Mars, planetary positions charted in stone. The staircase itself is an instrument, he murmured aloud, voice trembling. Not to climb, but to channel. Yet channel what? He reached another landing, this one open to the forest through narrow windows. From here, the woods stretched endlessly, a sea of green shadow. No smoke from villages, no sign of roads. The footsteps faded, or perhaps they had never been real. Rowan crouched in the dark, gripping his journal as though it were a shield. His lantern lay extinguished beside him, its glass still warm from the flame that had vanished without smoke. For long moments, he did not move. The forest outside whispered with nocturnal life, yet within the tower there was only silence, thick, suffocating, absolute. When his courage returned, Rowan struck flint against steel until a spark caught the wick. The lantern flared back to life, weak but steady. He forced himself down from the turret, each step of the mossy spiral groaning as though the tower disapproved. The chamber of inscriptions greeted him again, its walls crowded with the repeated phrase, clavis intermundos. The key between worlds. The word seemed almost to breathe under the lantern's glow. Rowan's eyes fell upon a portion of the wall where the stone looked uneven, as though a section had been hastily plastered over. He ran his hand across it and felt a hollow echo beneath. Curiosity overpowered caution. He retrieved his small chisel and began to pry. The stone gave way more easily than expected, as if eager to reveal its secret. Within the cavity lay a bundle wrapped in oilskin, brittle with age. Rowan drew it out with reverence, heart pounding. The bundle contained 3 small journals, their leather cracked, their pages yellowed but intact. The name etched into the first cover froze Rowan's breath. Erasmus Vale, 1602. With shaking hands, he opened the first volume. The handwriting within was meticulous, a scholar's hand, sharp and exact. The early entries spoke of mundane matters, purchases of stone, wages paid to masons, notes on the construction of the spiral stair. Yet threaded among these were darker passages. The alignment must be precise. Saturn and Mars at their opposition, Mercury in descent. The stair itself shall serve as the axis. They laugh at me, but they do not hear the voices as I do. Rowan did not leave the tower after discovering the journals. He should have fled back to the village, should have buried the cursed manuscripts where no hand could reach them, but knowledge, once glimpsed, is a hunger that gnaws at reason. For days, he camped at the tower's base, reading Erasmus Vale's words by the light of a trembling lantern. Each page drew him deeper, weaving sense and madness together until he could no longer separate one from the other. The journals spoke often of lunar phases. Vale had been obsessed with them, charting cycles of waxing and waning, scrawling diagrams of the heavens as if the very stones of the tower were gears in some vast celestial machine. One phrase returned again and again, sanguis luni, the blood moon. Rowan spread the manuscripts before him one evening, cross-referencing their diagrams with the almanacs he had carried on his travels. His heart pounded as realization struck. A blood moon was due within the fortnight. For Vale, it had been the chosen hour. For Rowan, it was the key to understanding the purpose of the tower. He told himself he studied only to witness, not to repeat. Yet even as he whispered this vow, he found his hand tracing Vale's instructions with unnatural certainty. Align the stair with the rising of Mars. Set flame to 7 candles about the altar. The offering must be made at the 3rd rotation of shadow. Then shall the key turn. Rowan shut the journal with a snap, as though sound alone might silence the whisper that followed the words. Finish what he began. The forest grew restless as the fated night approached. Birds abandoned their nests. Deer that once passed through the clearing now gave it wide berth. Once, Rowan woke to find a ring of dead moths encircling his campfire, their wings brittle as ash. On the eve of the blood moon, storm clouds rolled across the sky though no rain fell. The air buzzed with a pressure that raised the hair on Rowan's arms. The moss along the tower's base sea. The voice echoed through the chamber, rising above the thunder of collapsing stone and the hiss of bleeding moss. You cannot end what was never yours to command. Rowan turned, lantern sputtering in his grip. The air rippled at the edge of the circle, and within the crimson light a shape coalesced, first a blur, then a man, though wrong in ways that made Rowan's stomach lurch. Erasmus Vale. Or what remained of him? His figure shimmered like glass filled with smoke, every edge trembling as though unable to stay fixed in this world. His eyes were pits of starlight, deep and cold, yet his mouth curved into a scholar's knowing smile. His robes hung in tatters, but where the cloth frayed, it bled not thread but ink, dripping and vanishing before it touched the floor. Rowan Whitcomb, the figure said, voice layered, human and inhuman, many speaking as one. A name I read long before you were born. You were always meant to stand here. The key finds its bearer. Rowan's throat tightened. You're dead. You perished centuries ago. Vale's smile widened. Death? No. I crossed. I became as the tower intended. Look beyond the veil, Rowan, look, and see. The sigil pulsed, and for an instant Rowan's sight was wrenched outward. He glimpsed the infinite expanse again, the living colors, the shifting titans, the endless library with no walls. Vale walked there still, moving from tome to tome, his form unraveling as he read. He had not been consumed fully, but neither was he whole. Rowan staggered back, tearing his gaze free. You're trapped. I am preserved, Vale corrected sharply. Preserved in eternity while the world decays. Knowledge without rot, without end. Do you not crave it as I once did? Why else would you climb the stair? Why else would you speak the words? Rowan's chest tightened. The truth cut deep, he had spoken them, compelled by the hunger that drove every historian. But what Vale offered was not knowledge, it was surrender. You mistook hunger for dest. The tower breathed. Rowan felt it in the stones, in the faint vibration beneath his hands as he leaned against the turret wall. The sigil was gone, the journals destroyed, and Erasmus Vale with them. Yet the silence was not relief. It was waiting. The blood moon still loomed above, swollen and red, casting its light through the ruined turret. But now the glow seemed weaker, its power drained. The whispers had ceased, and the shadows had fled. The tower, however, remained alive. Rowan pulled himself upright, legs trembling. Below, half the spiral stair had collapsed, yawning into black void. There would be no easy descent. He forced himself to breathe, steady, calm. He had survived Erasmus Vale's legacy. He would survive the tower. But as he gathered his satchel, he froze. On the wall beside the turret, the moss pulsed faintly, not with the sickly black ichor of before, but with light. A soft, green glow, steady as a heartbeat. Rowan approached cautiously. The moss seemed to withdraw at his touch, revealing an engraving beneath. It was not Latin. Nor any tongue he knew. The characters spiraled inward, forming a circle, a second sigil, hidden all along beneath the living skin of the tower. And in the circle's center, one word appeared clear in his mind, though no script formed it: key. Rowan stumbled back, realization striking like a blade. He had been wrong. The tower was not merely a prison or a passage. It was both, a lock and a door. Erasmus Vale had believed himself the key. The shadows had whispered it to Rowan as well. But the truth was worse. The tower itself was the key. And Rowan, by speaking the words, by aligning the ritual with the blood moon, had turned it. The circle on the wall flared, and the turret groaned. Dust cascaded, stones shifted. A low hum filled the chamber, deep as thunder rolling underground. Rowan staggered to the edge and peered down the ruined stairwell. The walls glowed faintly with the same spiraling symbols, veins of light.